What's up, everybody, and welcome to the special Good Karma Wrestling. There it is, right there. If you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook or some of our other platforms for Good Karma Wrestling, I don't regret any of it from Mr. McMahon. This is a special review of the documentary for the first three episodes. If you have not seen that, please go to Netflix and check out the Mr. McMahon documentary on Netflix that's streaming right now. It started on Wednesday, and we're here to review it right here on a special edition of Good Karma Wrestling. Along with Charles Taylor from the CTJ Report, I am Jonathan Hood. Here we are. Thanks so much for being with us. As always, CJ, appreciate the time.
Appreciate you having me on as always, sir.
Yes, sir. And so, as we have a conversation, just put in the comments whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitch, or of course on Twitter or on X. If you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them. Just check in. If you've seen the documentary or if you've seen parts of the documentary, we'd love to get your reaction to what we've seen. First of all, CJ, let's talk about the WWE in these terms.
Mhm.
So, watching Vince McMahon, first of all, trying to be on the record talking about his life. At the beginning of the documentary, he talks about, oh, I'm not going to give it all to you. I'm not going to tell you. I got great stories, but I'm not going to give it all to you. I'll just try to make it interesting. You know, McMahon's never wanted to talk about himself. That is true.
Mhm.
Because if he really did want to talk about himself, it'd probably be scarier than what we've already seen.
Oh, absolutely. That was probably my biggest takeaway from like the first 5 minutes was just Vince like, I'm not gonna give you everything. And I think the hardcore fan is like, well, that's what we want. We want everything. But I think that little statement right there just told me kind of all I needed to know really about Vince, about who he is and who he doesn't want, kind of who people don't want to see. You really don't want to see the real Vince, because, like you said, it's scary. It is completely scary, and people will probably think of this man as a monster if you really got to see the Vince that I'm sure a lot of people behind the curtain get to see, while he was there. Every Monday or Fridays doing SmackDowns and Raws. It was that was a telling statement, and that kind of let you know how the rest of this documentary is going to go. The fact that he even was there on the record was
Mm-hmm.
enough for me because, like you said, he doesn't talk about himself.
Right.
It's usually other people talking about him, and then usually kind of in a kind of glorifying manner. Everyone talked about him as being this father figure, but to hear him speak about himself was really telling.
It's very rare for him to be able to talk about a lot of these things because he would never talk about it. I'm glad that he did.
Hmm.
Also, just before we really kind of do a deep dive in it, for Bill Simmons and for those that produced this, I did not expect for them to be talking about what's happening currently in WWE as far as the Janelle Grant story, that
Hmm.
the allegations and what is going on with Vince McMahon and all that. I didn't expect it, but they hit you right in the face with it first at the beginning. I thought, like a lot of these things that we've seen on Vice or in some of these
Hmm.
other places, that this would kind of be a puff piece and kind of just trying to make McMahon a baby face and talk about it like in certain terms, CJ, but not necessarily going all in.
Hmm.
Just through the first three episodes, clearly, Bill Simmons wanted to be able to cover everything as much as possible. A deep dive and telling you about the Janelle Grant stuff right at the beginning. And I guess they did that to let you know, hey man, this is not going to be just some puff piece just to glorify Vince McMahon's career.
Yeah, kudos to Bill Simmons and the entire crew that worked on this documentary because in working with Netflix, they could have easily have pulled back, especially with this 10-year deal that they have with WWE, to put Raw on Netflix. They could have given us the puff piece. They could have given us kind of a glorified episode of Dark Side of the Ring, but they chose to cover as much as they possibly could, and that I think is what the fans were looking for, is finally something that's kind of non WWE produced, that really kind of hits on the good, the bad, and in some cases the ugly.
There's a lot that we have to cover here because, again, if you're just joining us, we're going to talk about the first three episodes, and CJ will and I in a few days will cover the rest of it toward the weekend. So we want to be able to give you part one here and then part two another time. But again, if you've seen the documentary, we'd love to get your comments on what you've seen so far, your reactions. But we're going to give you our thoughts. We can't cover it all, but we'll cover a good portion of it, like this. So when did Linda McMahon turn into Hillary Clinton? We have not seen her for a while on camera, and when she sat down, and it's just like, my God, it's Hillary. She's completely just. She's not the thin woman like
Yeah.
that we saw in the ring. Was part of storylines. I'm like, wow, she's certainly changed, and to get her to be able to talk about her husband
Hmm.
was interesting as well,
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly I didn't recognize her when she first sat down. I was like,
right?
who the hell is that? Oh, it's Linda.
Right. So
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
that was interesting.
Getting her to actually, like you said, to sit down and talk
Yeah.
about the business, her husband, when, if you're reading articles, about their relationship maybe being estranged from one another, to get her to sit down and talk, about Vince was certainly eye-opening as well. Just to get her side of it, what she saw or what she was able to talk about. The thing that I did notice, and again in those first like 5-10 minutes, as everyone's sitting down, whether it's Undertaker or Linda McMahon or Shane or everybody, Jimmy Hart, and he's like, "So how much do you really want us to talk about?" And that, was also telling for me because they're what this documentary, which I think is really good, I still think is just scratching the surface of just how kind of deep this really goes with Vince.
Well, and this is like anything else. If Netflix want to do something on Diddy, once this is all settled with Diddy, if they want to
Yeah.
do this with other people, there's going to be people on the other side that's going to say, I don't know if how deep I could talk about Diddy's parties because I mean, look how much money I made with them, and I think that is the wrestlers.
Hmm.
I'm talking about people that you hear on radio, those that do podcasts, those that are in this documentary. There is a feeling of I'll give you some, but I can't give you to you all. I saw a lot of stuff, but Vince made me a millionaire. So, and Vince did these great things for me, and Vince
Hmm.
has this side of us that is very kind. And so that's how they know the other side, but they also know the reason why they're millionaires is because of Vince. And so I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of that that's going on, except there's a few others that don't mind telling the story, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
So Vince McMahon and his dad, the upbringing with his dad, I thought was interesting, CJ, in
Hmm.
which Vince talks about taking over for his dad. It gave us a little bit more of a glimpse into Vince Sr., by the way, because it's like, Vince Sr., so you were off, taking care of the WWF at the time,
Hmm.
and your son was in a trailer park in North Carolina. And so you guys were estranged for whatever reason. That's one part we don't know about the relationship between Vince's actual birth mom
Yeah.
and Vince Sr. And so somehow, some way, Vince got out of that terrible situation, which we heard for years. He was beaten severely by his stepdad or the person that was the man of the house, living in
Hmm.
a trailer park, and somehow he was able to reconnect with his dad. And so I thought that was very interesting. Again, there's one side of it we don't know. Why did Vince Sr. not connect with this woman, but yet
Yeah.
Vince was able to get back with his dad and ultimately work with him?
Yeah, that was a really interesting part too. That for the first 12 years of Vince Jr.'s life, that he had no interaction with Vince Sr. like at all. Um, uh, he he just kind of grazed over, and which I could understand the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his stepfather. But I
Mhm.
also thought that that was telling too, because from that little statement, you just really get the sense that Vince really just tried to bury that deep instead of really just sitting down with someone or people and really fleshing that out. And I think part of that is what made Vince the person that he ended up becoming, was just, bury it deep, push forward, do what I need to do to survive and thrive. And I think that's how he kind of took that and just kind of forged not only his whatever that relationship was with his father, but then how he handled his business with the WWF.
So, CJ, I think that the reason why that this documentary works is because for those that don't know the business and those that do know the business, this works on both ends.
Hmm.
I think it's a refresher, some of it for us diehard wrestling fans, but the ones that are not can be able to see, okay, so what was the territory system like? The
Hmm.
territory system was in place. I like these imaginary fault lines where you had wrestling in the Northeast that was run by Vince McMahon Sr. You had Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler in Memphis. You had the Von
Hmm.
Erichs in Texas. You had Eddie Graham in Florida. You had NWA Hollywood Wrestling with the LaBelle family. Vern Gagne in the Midwest, Chicago,
Hmm.
Minneapolis. The Sheik in Detroit. They laid out the territory map to show you this is how wrestling used to be, where there was so many places for wrestlers to work. Going back to the 1940s and 50s, there was these territories. The Funks had their, if you notice in Texas, they had their Amarillo spot. Joe
Hmm.
Blanchard had San Antonio. So it just goes on, where Vince McMahon had his piece of the pie, Vince McMahon Sr. And so here's Vince Jr. that just wants to be able to get his father's attention, was in those meetings. It's an interesting dynamic, CJ, when you think about it. Here's Vince Jr. that's just around his dad, just learning the business because that was their relationship. Almost like Vince Sr. looked at Vince Jr. as a business partner, like in the circle with Arnold
Yeah.
Skolin and in there with Gorilla Monsoon. And just like that's how they were able to get along because they always talked about the business.
Yeah. And while that was great for Vince Jr. to, be around all of those other owners of the territories, be around his father Vince Sr. to learn the business, and then to be able to manipulate that for his own gain to eventually, basically wipe out the territories. Again, that also says a lot about whatever that relationship was between him and his father. That it was just strictly talking about the industry, talking about the business. I think Vince Jr. tried to use that to really gain acceptance and love from his father. And I just think from Vince Sr.'s end, it was just more about, like you said, here's a business partner that I can, teach the business to, that maybe someday can carry on the name. Even though in the documentary, people talked about how Vince Sr. actually wanted to give the business over to Gorilla Monsoon, and that created the friction between Vince Jr. and Gorilla. So that was also another interesting piece of information there.
That's some information I was not aware of.
Neither was I.
Yeah, I was not aware that there was friction or that Vince Sr. I know that Gorilla Monsoon was in the mix as far as being in the circle because, Gorilla, he worked for Vince Sr., right? So
Hmm.
he worked for Vince Sr., so, and he was an office guy. And so I did not know that Gorilla was going to be next. So, even someone as old as me did not know, and I think I've been watching this for a long time, I didn't know how close Gorilla could have been to be able to run the company. So I thought something also was very interesting during this time. So the WWE has always been a babyface champion on top
Hmm.
territory. It's a babyface territory. It always has been a good guy territory.
Hmm.
Because if you look through the lineage of time, look how long, CJ, that Bruno Sammartino was on top.
Yeah.
For years and years and years, the champion of WWF, but also, really the guy from the Northeast. And
Hmm.
so, after Bruno's run and Bruno becomes a broadcaster, Vince Sr. still thought about a baby face, usually an ethnic baby face, because that's what worked in the Northeast. I got to
Hmm.
have the way he booked. I need my Italian. I need my black wrestler. I
Yeah.
need my Irish wrestler. I need
Mhm.
my German wrestler. I need my Russian wrestler
Mhm.
because all of that, even though that sounds crazy in 2024, that resonated with people in the Northeast. And so they liked the Italian stallion of Bruno San Martino being on top. But then you move forward, and it's funny they glazed over the whole Dusty Rhodes and
Yeah.
Superstar Graham thing. They glazed over that for whatever reason, which is fine. But they got to the Backlund story.
Mhm. Yeah. Backlund was the guy, at one point in time, and he carried the company for quite some time. As we move though into the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and Backlund's time is kind of coming to an end, as the face. Um, Vince also Vince Jr., because I know we have to keep separating, Vince Senior
Yeah,
from Jr.
yeah.
Vince Jr. understands the changing dynamic of the 80s and wanting to kind of blend reality a bit with the industry. He hated pro wrestling. No, no, no. That's just not right. This is sports entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So that was him looking for, who can I get next to be that guy once Backlund's time comes to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he starts to look into different territories. Hey, who's this babyface, or who's this guy, or who's that guy that might be the one that can carry me into the 80s? At the same time, looking at the political climate of the 80s, and how can I weave that into these wrestling stories? It's genius on his part, also a little ruthless on his part in
No,
the fashion in which he went about, you know, getting these other stars from other territories.
if you we'd have to do a deep dive, you and I, of the rosters right before Vince Senior died,
Hmm.
and if you notice, Vince is like, well, it could be Dusty Rhodes, but no, that wouldn't work because Dusty wasn't a body guy. It was very brief though, but it was almost a shot at Dusty saying, I
Oh, I
like the
was.
charisma. I like the
Hmm.
charisma, but I don't like the because he's not a body guy, so it doesn't
Yeah,
work. If Dusty was built with that charisma, he probably would have pushed him as champion. But even
yeah,
even though I'm sure some of the fans at the Garden in New York were like, yeah, we're behind Backlund, but he's kind of howdy doody, a little
hmm,
bit too polished, that kind of thing. You're
yeah,
right. Once Vince's father passed away, it was an opportunity for Vince to say, "All right, we need a transitional champion." I mean, it's just wide open on the documentary. We'll just give it to the Sheik, so eventually he
yeah.
can give it to Hulk Hogan,
Hmm.
and so so now with Hulk Hogan and along with the Rock and Wrestling connection, now Rock and Wrestling is born because it's Hogan as champion, and that's cool because Hogan's different, Hogan's cool. And Hogan, by the way, I'm glad they gave the perspective of Hogan was already in the company in the 70s,
Hmm.
in the late 70s for his dad because they thought, oh, Irish babyface. That's the reason. I mean, Terry Bollea was right there for you as an
Yeah.
Italian last name, but they go, no, we want the Irish name. So we're going to call you, you're going to be Hulk Hogan. Okay, great. So Hogan in the company, and then Vince Sr., who he didn't understand the entertainment aspect of wrestling. Your
Yeah.
wrestler being in a movie would be cool. Nope, you're
Hmm.
not going to do Rocky 3. I'm not?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you know what? I'll go back to Vern in AWA because Vern already had a movie called The Wrestler that was
Hmm.
terrible, but yet he understood. Even Vern Gagne, as old school as Vern was, understood the whole thing of entertainment and wrestling. And so if Vince Senior's not gonna let me do this movie, from Hogan's standpoint, then I'll go back to Vern and I'll
Hmm.
do Rocky 3. I'll do the movie and I'll be even a bigger star. And he was.
Yeah. Vern Gagne, and just a little backstory of how I just really got into wrestling. It was through the AWA.
Yeah.
That's how I really got into it. Was the AWA, and watching, uh, Hogan in those days around 82, 83. Nick Bockwinkel, which was one of my favorites in the AWA days. But Vern did understand that he needed to have wrestlers with the look, with the body, but also able to entertain. And he had some great characters in AWA. And Hogan, understood that I can really kind of really flesh out this Hulk Hogan thing. And when the time came for Vince to poach him, uh, he was able to do that. And then, just after WrestleMania one, just Hogan's star power just shoots to the moon, because Vince Jr. again understands the dynamic of society in the '80s and how to push uh, uh, characters. The mid '80s was all about America, and it was America against Russia, and it was America against Iran, and America against the evil Japanese. So Vince got all those characters, to be the foils, if you will, for Hogan, to kind of go on this run that Hogan went on as the baby face, as the face of WWF, and the champion. You had Nikita Koloff, you had Roddy Piper, you had a number of wrestlers from different ethnic backgrounds going up against the All American guy in Hogan, and it sold. It worked.
Nikolai Volkov. Yeah,
Yeah,
Iron Sheik.
Nikolai Volkov. Yeah,
Yeah, all
Iron
those.
Sheik.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
those guys. And so, and when you take a couple of steps back, CJ, you think from Vince's standpoint, this is Broadway because it
Hmm.
is New York, right? It's like, so I
Yeah.
get it. Like you're gonna bring in Billy Martin and Liberace and like the dancers and all that other stuff because he
Yeah.
put all his money in. And even Stephanie said, yeah, this is I heard rumblings that this is going to be it. If
Yeah.
WrestleMania one was a flop, then they would have been back in the trailer park. But it worked out well. So along with that, we learned about kayfabe and the John Stossel story. Getting, John Stossel, and I remember as a kid, my parents watching 2020, and John
Hmm.
Stossel was always there to just be the stick in the beehive, the guy that's asking the tough questions, all the
Yeah.
man on the street, representing the people. And John Stossel was like number of these guys. It wasn't just John; it was a number of people
Hmm.
that love to put wrestling on their newscast, like here's phony wrestling and is it real? That kind of thing, right? And John Stossel had to be one of those guys. And this is the problem with wrestling back then. They let those guys in. They
Yeah.
did not vet these guys because
Yeah.
at this time this is kayfabe, where it is performance, yes, and the endings are predetermined, but they didn't explain that. They just came across as wrestling's real and this is a real sport,
Hmm.
all that. So it takes a weasel like John Stossel to get in there and just to say, hey, wrestling's fake, and then there's Dr. D. David Schultz slapping the shit out of him, letting them know like, yo, you think that's phony, you think that's so he slaps him a couple times and he leaves the garden. And so, I love the backstory of Tony Atlas and others saying that, yeah, Vince didn't say to go out and slap John Stossel to protect our business, but he said, I
Hmm.
wish someone would do something with this guy. I wish someone would do something. And David Schultz was like, I'll do that. I'll do it for you, and slap the shit out of John Stossel. Richard Belzer, the same thing. That thing's on YouTube, by the way, if people want to see it.
Yeah.
Richard Belzer had his own show, talk about how phony wrestling is. And at that time, CJ, you had to protect the business. Even Hogan
Hmm.
puts him in a front face lock and chokes Belzer out.
Hmm.
So at that time, it just gave it an idea that, hey, you may think wrestling's fake, but I'm not fake because I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah. That was the mentality. That was the how the industry worked. Um, you had to keep kayfabe alive at all times. There was a something in the I think it was the Ric Flair documentary, where he talked about how there was one night where he and I think it might have been either Ricky Steamboat or Dusty Rhodes ended up in the same liquor store, and they just had to keep the kayfabe alive because people were there. So
Yeah.
they almost get into a brawl, in the liquor store just for the sake of keeping kayfabe alive. When like 5 minutes later, they were both going back to the hotel and just chugging down drinks with each other. But that was the industry. So Hogan choking out Richard Belzer and John Stossel, getting pimp slapped, on TV. you did whatever you had to do to keep it going because that's just how the time worked. If you watched wrestling back in the 80s, you just were just under the belief that hey, these guys actually hate each other. And they're
Yeah.
going out there and they're beating the crap out of each other for 25, 30 minutes because that's how it was sold and that's how we grew up being wrestling fans.
So leave your comments, by the way, if you're just joining us. We're talking about the McMahon documentary that's out there right now. Mr. McMahon is on Netflix, and CJ and I are reviewing it right now. Leave your comments here. This will be part one of our review of the documentary on Netflix, Mr. McMahon. So we'll get to some of your comments. So WrestleMania 1 is a success, and it's so funny. I don't know if you noticed this or not. Man, they went past WrestleMania 2 so quick. Because it was such a, I mean, look, from my standpoint, was it a failure? I don't know if they broke even or if they made money on it. I think that that's murky too. But just the
Yeah,
idea that, I mean, WrestleMania 2 was such a blip on this documentary. It's like, God damn, I won't be doing that again. Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. It was weird because in LA, it was like Lord Alfred and I think
right.
Lord Alfred's doing play by play. It was just
Yeah.
bizarre, right? Because Vince needs to have that control, and he's only in
Hmm.
New York, and then like the other shows are happening, so they went past it quickly, like it didn't happen. Like, oh, WrestleMania 2, it was too much to handle.
Yeah, I think that was Vince thinking big as he normally does, and thinking that he could pull something like this off in the mid '80s, which is even wilder that he thought he could pull that off in the mid '80s, and it just turned out to it wasn't a disaster, but they certainly had a lot of problems with that show. One interesting thing though, before they got to the point of the quickly just grazing over WrestleMania 2 like it didn't exist
Yeah.
was uh, the whole union thing.
Yes. With Jesse Ventura. Yes.
Yeah.
So here's what we learned. If people did not know this, Hogan was the biggest stooge for McMahon.
Hmm.
Now I know that they've had their ups and downs over the years. I don't know what the relationship is now, but they've had some ups and downs. Hogan comes across as just like the number one guy that backs Vince. The
Yeah.
whole union thing, and I've heard Ventura talk about this in other platforms. Talked about CJ like, hey, we should unionize, and it is. And the truth of it is that you can't get everybody to agree on lunch in wrestling.
Right.
So it would have been hard to get everybody under the same plan. I'm glad it was on the record though, because Ventura's been saying it for a long time, and Hogan
Hmm.
wants you to know on this documentary. Yeah, I told Vince that Ventura was trying to unionize, and so now, without any doubt, you were the biggest stooge in the company. I understand that you're the champion, but my
Yeah.
God, man, you just ran to Vince as soon as you heard anything. You heard this. This is a thread all throughout the documentary. To me,
Hmm.
is McMahon is Hogan running to Vince to tell him stuff, or hey Vince, what about a movie? Or they were like lock and step, these two together.
Yeah, which you've read stories, I've read stories, about Hogan's, backstage politics and how
Yeah,
he did things backstage. But like you said, to have him actually on the record, saying, "Yeah, I went to Vince and said that Jesse's trying to start some shit," with this union thing. Is like, wow, that everything that Bret Hart and other people have said about Hogan over the years. Hogan just let you know, yeah, that's who I was. That's what I was about. Finally, he's kind of letting that out after decades and decades of trying to portray himself as the ultimate baby face in front of the camera and behind it. But that was also another interesting point of that whole union thing. And um, like I said, just Hogan just really being the biggest stool pigeon, just
everything.
always running to Vince because uh, it's kind of like you said, he knew where the checks were coming. He knew who was signing the checks, and he was
Yeah,
getting the biggest check by far.
Yeah,
of all the wrestlers.
he's on top. So, but I mean, he just ran to him for everything, and that's what stood
Yeah.
out to me about the documentary in that regard. So now we get to WrestleMania 3 and Hogan and
Hmm.
Andre. And we're going to get into these scandals in a moment, by the way, because this is all throughout. This documentary told a great story of Vince and the good things he did as far as booking and making a lot of
Hmm.
money in these big houses. We're going to get to that
Yeah.
in just a second because the scandals are coming, and it's coming a lot after WrestleMania 3. So we'll get to
Oh
that.
yes.
We just want to check off this Hogan Andre thing. So Hogan was concerned about Andre, and it was just a great idea to be able to have Hogan and Andre together. If you're in the Northeast, by the way, and you're watching this and listening to this, and you're an old school wrestling fan, you saw this at Shea Stadium where the Mets used to play. You saw
Hmm.
this in Philadelphia. You saw this in New York. That they've wrestled before, Hogan and Andre. But again, it's McMahon's imagination. If we don't mention that they've ever wrestled before, it's a brand new match. How
Yeah.
can we get 78,000, 80,000, 93,173. I'll never forget that number as a kid. But this is when you inflate the numbers. This is no
Yeah.
different than any other sport, by the way. You inflate the numbers from an attendance standpoint. Whatever it was a big house. My point
Yeah.
is that Hogan Andre in a which I thought was a very good card overall.
Hmm.
But Hogan and Andre built the house, and man, the whole thing of Hogan being afraid of Andre, Andre not saying anything, you're not selling at all, and Hogan not even sure if he's going to win. I don't know if that's really true, but I know that's legend, and we saw this in documentary.
Yeah.
Hogan had to know that Andre's going to do business. I don't know. Andre was not going to mess it up for himself, saying, "No, boss, I'm going to kick out at 2 on your leg drop."
Yeah.
Andre wasn't going to do that, so I don't know if that's bullshit or not. But I know it's legend that Hogan was concerned about Andre.
Yeah, that was I found that to be a little head scratching because I mean Hogan had to know that he was going to win this match. Uh, Andre obviously was at the tail end of his career in terms of wrestling, and by the time we got to WrestleMania 3, I mean Hogan was like the biggest thing in wrestling, period. So he just had to know that he was going to go over, and that Andre was going to do the honors and pass the torch to him. But for him to sit up there and be like, "Well, brother, I didn't know going into the match whether or not I was going to win." Really, So, you knew.
Right, right. So I don't. I just. I mean, they're going to do. They were going to do business. So I just think that that's all interesting. A couple of things were left out. I know you can't get everything in a documentary. So let's get to the Ultimate Warrior. So he wins the championship because I mean, even Bruce Pritchard, shocking. Bruce Pritchard saying that Hulk Hogan got a little stale after a while, after being champion for a while, and the whole act with Hogan got old, and so they go to the Ultimate Warrior, and he wins the championship. Did you notice, CJ, that Hogan kicked out at 3.5? Did you
Yeah.
notice that? Did you notice the kick
I,
out after when the Ultimate Warrior won? What a dick! I mean, like
I've
if you're going to lose, just lose flat.
yeah,
Just you lost.
just
Yeah,
lose clean. I mean, kicking out as the ref is got the hand to three. Like that's just the ultimate dick move. Like give that man his flowers right there. This was supposed to be your passing of the torch to him, but that again, it just kind of goes back to who we have come to find out that Hogan was or is. Unrelenting of giving up the spotlight. Even I've watched that match several times. Even after Ultimate Warrior won, there's Hogan taking the belt from the ref and then giving it to Ultimate Warrior and prancing around like this was like just roll your ass out the ring like everybody else does who loses and let the Ultimate Warrior have his moment.
no, can do that. So the Ultimate Warrior, wins the championship. Please leave your comments. We're going to read your comments moving forward here on our review of this McMahon documentary here. And so Hogan and Slaughter, we get this match in '91, right? So they turn
Mhm.
Slaughter heel, and we don't get this as much anymore, but
Yeah,
McMahon understood the pulse of what was going on in society. This has been going on for years and years and years leading into this, where
Hmm.
professional wrestling would be a microcosm of what's in the news and how
Hmm.
can we mirror what's going on in pop culture, good or bad. And so
Hmm.
the Gulf War is happening. It's Hogan and Slaughter. They had to turn Slaughter heel, and that was not foreign to Slaughter because he had been heel in Mid Atlantic before, but
Yeah.
primarily a babyface for a long time, especially in that
Hmm.
WWE run.
Yeah.
And then so Hogan and Slaughter had this match. They did not mention that the match was going to be at the LA Coliseum, which would have been, God, 80,000,
Hmm.
90,000. I don't know. I mean, they would have drawn a big number, but it was
Yeah.
moved because of the threats to the country. So they moved it into the LA Sports Arena where the Clippers played. They didn't, I don't know if they mentioned that, but um, I will give McMahon credit for this from a booking standpoint. This is
Hmm.
what's going on in the country. We need to have Americana because Hogan is the American guy, and so we need him to have a foil or an opponent. And so it's Slaughter. And I think even though it wasn't on the biggest stage as far as
Yeah.
attendance, they had the match.
Yeah. Like I said, kudos to McMahon for always just kind of having his finger on the pulse of what was going on in society. That was also a bit of a controversial move that Vince made. Not necessarily turning Slaughter heel, but turning him heel and being an Iraqi sympathizer during the height of the Gulf War, and then Iraq going and invading Kuwait. So that makes the story like even hotter. There's more heat, that's brought to the story. Vince sees it through. Um, up until the match, to see this all the way through. So once again, Hogan can have his moment. The United States of America, can be the shining light on the hill or whatever the hell that saying is. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it was just one of those things that Vince took gambles. He took gambles because he understood that if you can, and it was what they talked about, if you can draw into the emotion, you can bring the emotion out of the fan that's watching. They're going to be invested in the story, and they were. I mean, unfortunately for Slaughter, he did receive some death threats because of what he went through. But you got people invested into that particular storyline.
CJ, along with the great booking comes a lot of issues with Vince McMahon. The creative
Hmm.
genius is one side of it, but the other side of Vince McMahon is the scandals that took place, and we need to delve into them.
Yeah.
Let's go to talking about the Jimmy Snuka scandal. Now, Jimmy Snuka had a girlfriend that he was with for a long time, and there's speculation that Jimmy Snuka killed his girlfriend.
Hmm.
And the story is that the lore is that Vince McMahon went into the police station, had a briefcase full of money, and that got snuck out of the police station and put him back into the ring. Now I don't know. Again, that story, as you well know, had reopened on Snuka
Hmm.
after what was it, 30 years, or it was a
Oh
cold
yeah, just
case.
about. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I think, that, I mean, that's one thing we should also talk about, the Ring Boy scandal, because that stands out
Mm,
big time.
yeah.
Okay. So a lot of people think that Terry Garvin is Jimmy or Ronnie Garvin, and that's not the case.
No,
It's a different Garvin. This is
completely
Terry
different
Garvin.
dude.
Terry Garvin was a former wrestler and also worked in the front office of WWF at the time. Mel Phillips, the reason why that I knew Mel Phillips was because that's the only black ring announcer that I could
Hmm.
ever recall. And I'm talking
Yeah.
about like watching wrestling. There was no black, so I remember him. And of course, there's Pat Patterson, who was a great
Hmm.
wrestler in the Bay Area and worked for Vince Senior and was a front office person and a great booker for a long time. But the point is, though, is that there was sexual assault that was happening in this company under Vince's watch. And there was a feeling to me as I watched this. I don't know how you felt, but there was a lot of boys will be boys kind of situation where Vince turned a blind eye to it. We've seen this in sports a lot where coaches,
Hmm.
all they care about is the next game. And there could be shit that's happening down the hall. And coaches like, you handle it. The assistants, they should handle it. They let them
Hmm.
handle it. And I think there was a lot of that from Vince. Vince knew that Pat Patterson was gay,
Hmm.
and he was openly gay. But I know that Vince had to know that, hey, Tony Atlas says, well, Pat Patterson just kept grabbing my dick. And so from Tony's standpoint, he's like, well, I can't tell Vince because I'll get fired, and I can't tell on Pat. Same thing with Terry Garvin and these ring boys. We should delve into this. The ring boys were local young men that would help set up the
Hmm.
ring. And Mel Phillips has been accused of messing with these kids, taking their shoes off and sucking their toes. And I don't know if there was sex involved, but the point is that it was inappropriate behavior by Mel Phillips. But these are the things that we've heard for a long time. Pat Patterson, for all the stories that we've heard, proposition wrestlers in the past.
Hmm.
You heard Tony Atlas, who is the MVP of this documentary, talk about
Yeah.
how had his pecker grabbed. We've heard, if you go to YouTube, Gorilla Monsoon and Lord Alfred Hayes have joked about Terry Garvin and
Hmm.
him attempting to sexually assault wrestlers. They've joked about it on broadcast.
Hmm.
Why is that funny? Boys will be boys, and that's kind of my takeaway from all of that.
That is exactly the takeaway that everybody should have about these scandals, and that was the start. And there've probably been some incidents before the Ring Boy scandal, but that was really the start of just kind of decades long things that were happening and other stories that we have heard throughout the years of the boys being boys, and the locker room behavior, type attitudes that were happening. You and I both know the sordid tale of the plane ride from hell.
Yeah.
That was a couple of decades later, um, and where Vince is literally on the plane and just like oblivious for whatever reason to all the assault that was happening on the plane. This is just standard MO, and kind of comes to define that other side of Vince McMahon. Like, you know, the boys are gonna be boys. Just as long as you guys go out there in the ring and give me a good product, I really don't give a shit what goes on behind the curtains.
You can't, but CJ, that can't. Listen. I know it's a different time, but still, the assault is the assault.
Hmm.
And things are, and obviously, thank God that things are better now. The Chicago
Yeah.
Blackhawks hockey team is still trying to
Ah,
recover from the sexual
yeah.
assault that was taking place with Kyle Beach
Hmm.
as a player, and so you know what's so disheartening about it is that Mel Phillips and Terry Garvin deserve to be fired, and
Hmm.
so should have Pat Patterson,
Hmm.
based on all the allegations. But because Pat was like one of the best bookers in the business,
Hmm.
that's why he was fired and then brought back. And I know he was in and out of the company a lot, but the
Yeah.
point is though is that you'll still have people today. They'll talk about Pat the worker in wrestling, Pat the
Hmm.
booker. But what
Yeah.
about the sexual assault though? What about all that? His propositioning of wrestlers. And Vince, because he liked Pat, kept him around. Bruce
Hmm.
Pritchard will tell you right now how great Pat was, but he will not talk about, his sexual proclivities trying to proposition wrestlers allegedly from the stories that we've heard over the years. Um,
And that has been the theme really of how the WWF slash WWE operated under Vince. This
also,
is the Yeah, this is what's going on. This is uh Vince assaulting people, Pat Patterson assaulting people. But it's like Tony Allen said, who the hell am I gonna tell about this? Pat Patterson's the booker. I can't go to Vince, but but
which
that
is
was
sad.
it is. It's very sad that even obviously this would not fly in 2024, but even 3 4 decades ago that should not have been standard operating practices for these wrestlers and this talent to have to fear about speaking up about, call it what it is. sexual assault and in some cases rape,
Right. Yeah.
for fear of losing your job. Because by this time, when the Ring Boys thing was going on, Vince had basically conquered the territories. So it wasn't like you as a wrestler really had a lot of options to go to, at that point. NWA, WCW was there. There may be a couple other promotions that were still, kind of around towards the late 80s, but Vince had conquered it all. So you were basically at his mercy. And if you wanted to work, if you wanted to, get a good check or, just be on a prime stage like WWF, you had to take that, unfortunately.
That's that's so unfortunate. And there's a reason why I say Tony Atlas so far from what we see in the documentary is is like the to me the MVP is because he's just open with it.
Mhm.
Tony doesn't need a check anymore. He's just telling you. Tony said in the documentary, he goes, "Yeah, we abuse women like a toy."
Oh,
I mean,
so
just brazen with it though, but just like telling you, like, yeah, during our time, we just use women like our toy, and like, yeah, these things happen to me, but where else would I go? Like, if I
yeah.
told Vince that Pat did this to me, there was places that he could have gone, but he could have
Mhm.
made the money at WWE, and I think that sucks. The other thing too, and I know that we're 46 minutes into this, CJ, and we're going to get your comments in here in just a moment as we start to wrap this. You know what also resonated, and I haven't gotten to this yet, but I think we should talk about it.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon is letting everyone know that he cheated on his wife and cheated on
Oh,
his wife a lot. Like, just I had a consensual relationship that I ended, as he talks about with this newest case that we're talking about here with
mhm,
Grant. But Rita Chatterton was the first female referee that I saw in wrestling.
mhm.
And then Rita says, and she said this on Geraldo, and just shows you how far behind that we were back then. Rita says I was forced into oral sex when I couldn't complete his desires. So Vince, according to her, pretty much said, okay, well then, if you won't complete my desires, then I'm going to rape you. But Vince also openly is talking about, yeah, I've had these relationships and these affairs while I'm still married to Linda. I mean, just wide open with it, like no denial. Like, who does that? Vince does that. He doesn't regret any of it.
Yeah, well, he said he regretted nothing. Um, the Rita situation was just really kind of stomach churning for me to hear Vince's own words where he talks about, well, this is a consensual relationship. And well, I mean, even if it was rape, we've passed the statute of limitations. Just just flippantly just throwing that out there. And that kind of really gets you to thinking like where's his mindset, you know, uh, when it comes to this openly cheating on your wife. Like, I wish they kind of would have gotten Linda's real thoughts on that. And that's, probably the stuff that they didn't really want to get into. How did Linda feel about that? Because the Rita thing was out there.
Yes.
The Janelle Grant thing was out there, and the countless women in between those two horrific cases were out there. I mean, the Mr. McMahon character was, groping women on live TV. It's that part of it. Um, was like I said, was just stomach churning that you could just flippantly talk about, these extramarital affairs that you were having. And let's not even call them affairs. That they weren't affairs. You were sexually assaulting these women.
That's how it's being read, and that's why the trial is going to take place. I'm sure at some point with Janelle Grant, or it's going to be a settlement. Because a lot of these
Mhm.
things, as we've seen in the documentary, a lot of these things are settlements.
Yeah.
So it's just that and the steroid scandal. I don't know how to read that. I mean, I've read every. I mean, I understand the story, CJ, but just was Vince aware that his wrestlers during that time took steroids? Yes.
Hmm.
because he was a body guy and he started the
Yeah.
WBF that he had to
Hmm.
get rid of because of steroid trial. So
Yeah.
it was nip and tuck. I think that part of the story of him not sure if he's going to go to jail or not, I think that was true, only
Hmm.
because we hear the story a lot of that during that time. Vince McMahon told Jerry Jarrett, because you ran Memphis so well, if I go to jail, I'm going to need you to run WWF for me because he trusted Jarrett. That's not part of the documentary, but that's a story I've heard for a long time. Bruce Pritchard says that didn't happen, but we've heard too many stories of Vince confiding in Jerry Jarrett saying, "Hey, man, I don't know if I'm going to go to jail or not. So run the company for me." And of course, like anything else, Vince has been able to get away with this stuff. So the steroid thing, did he tell them to take steroids? Probably, probably, but he was not found guilty of that particular allegation.
Yeah, that was actually probably the only time where Vince like truly felt afraid of the consequences of what he was involved in or knew about. And once that trial came to an end and he was, basically found innocent of that, just again getting into his mindset that yeah, I've escaped this thing, and at this point, the federal government came after me. I'm invincible at this point. I can do anything at this point. And I
Yeah.
think that's how he led his life, pretty much up until the end.
All right. Couple other things too. I think that's good for people to know, and that is, well, you're frozen, brother. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh,
I don't. Yeah, you're completely frozen. But you know what? You have a good profile, so that works for us. So uh, we come to find out, and I've known this for a long time, but I'm glad it was in the documentary. The Bret Hart screw job was not the first screw job in the history of the WWE. It was Wendy Richter against the Fabulous Moolah. So Wendy Richter did not want to give up the championship, and that's strange in itself during that time. And so Wendy says that she did not know that Moolah was under the mask, which I think is hilarious because I'm sure that Wendy Richter and Moolah wrestled all across the country. And I
hmm
just thought that's very. I thought it was very strange that Wendy said at one point she didn't know that was Moolah, and then of
yeah,
course the roll up and then the 1, 2, 3 at the Garden, and Wendy loses the championship. That's the first screw job. Before Brett and Sean, that was the
yeah,
first screw job. Wendy Richter got screwed out of the championship because she didn't want to give it up.
yeah. So that was actually one tidbit information that I didn't know about.
Hmm.
Was that Wendy Richter job, and that was that was just kind of wild to hear Vince's tale of it, and I kind of wish they would have dug a little deeper to get Wendy's side of the story a little more about why she refused to drop the belt. But yeah, that being the first screw job basically told you, Vince was able to pull it off, and he knew he always had something like that in his back pocket if he ever needed to do it again. And here we go, a decade later, and here's Bret Hart, refusing to want to drop the title before he leaves for WCW, which everyone knew. And Vince is like, no, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna screw you, and as soon as Shawn Michaels got him into the sharps, ring the bell,
Yeah, that's right.
and it was that really set the stage though for because at that particular time, they were in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. Hogan had already left, Savage had already left, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had already left. Now you're seeing Bret Hart defect and go to WCW.
Hmm.
Vince again, and this kind of gets to the genius of how he is as a booker and as a showrunner. He used that Montreal screw job to his advantage to create the Mr. McMahon character and to help usher in the Attitude Era. and that's what again flipped the tables for WWE at that time because they were just getting their ass handed to them on a weekly
Yeah.
basis by WCW during that time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, CJ, because um, there's so many different sides of McMahon, and one of them is McMahon feeling like when his back is against the ropes, feeling like he's being mistreated. As we go
Hmm.
back to the earlier part of this podcast, you talked about how Vince McMahon invaded the territories. Just as an AWA fan, just took my heart out, taking Gene Okerlund and
Oh,
Bobby Heenan and Vince and
yeah.
Tito Santana and on and on, Adrian Adonis and so
Hmm.
many, great AWA superstars, and just dismantled the AWA. He did that going to Mid South and got JYD out of Louisiana and,
Hmm.
got guys out of Florida. So he was able to kind of rebuild his company by taking. So when WCW gets Hogan and it gets Savage and it gets Luger and some of these former WWE guys,
Yeah.
now Vince feels like, oh, we're just a small family business. I can't believe that WCW would do that. It's such bullshit. It's just like,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that it was in the documentary that whoever's asked the question, it's like, Vince, did you not do that in the '80s? Did you not, get talent and bought talent and put them in your company? You dismantled the territory step by step because it was good business. So
Hmm.
isn't that good business when Ted Turner does it? And somehow, some way, he didn't get the connection. But then just like said, well, in my mind, I have to say what I say is not what I really mean. Like whatever you said, it was just so
Yeah.
far fetched and so just mental. I'm like, dude, you dismantled the territories because you had more money and you had a
Hmm.
bigger platform, and that's America. I get that part
Yeah.
of it. As much as I think it sucked, I understand why you did it. But when
Hmm.
someone else does it, like Tony Khan today or Eric
Yeah.
Bischoff then, it's like, oh, our small little company now is just. I don't know if we could just keep the water in the offices. I don't know if we can keep the lights on because they took all of our talent. Seriously, seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that to be especially funny, considering just how he just tore through all pretty much all of the territories with the exception of and he grabbed a few from NWA as well. But he just tore
Yeah.
through all the territories and ripped them to shreds. And the fact that Eric Bischoff was able to do the same thing, just turn about as fair play, in that regard. And you know, here's how you keep wrestlers from leaving your company and going to the competitor. Make better content, and that's
Yes,
what
and
Vince wasn't doing,
no.
during the early to mid '90s. The content for WWE at that time was terrible, and the WCW figure out, um, and kudos to Eric Bischoff. And I know you and I both have our thoughts about Eric Bischoff over the years, but
Mhm.
kudos to him for understanding the shifting climate change, which was something that Vince was known for in the '80s, but somehow he lost that during the early part of the '90s into the mid '90s of understanding the climate change. Rap
That's
was
100%. Yeah.
yeah, rap and hip hop was starting to dominate more. Grunge rock was starting to take off more. There was more of kind of an anti-authority sentiment, happening in the '90s, and Eric Bischoff just fed off of that and put that into Monday Nitro and WCW.
Meanwhile, Hogan's doing handshake deals with Lex Luger and Hulk Hogan. Hogan, you won't go to the competition, right? No, brother, I'll never go to the competition. Lex, we're still working on that deal, man. Don't worry about it. Ha ha. And all of a sudden, he's at the Mall of America in Minneapolis. So to
Yeah.
me, you laid it out perfectly. Vince was behind the times then, where
Hmm.
he was such on the cusp and on the edge in the 80s and knew the rock and wrestling connection and get it. And now you get into the 90s and now you got wrestlers that was like, hey, the handshake deal doesn't work, man. Either you're gonna pay me or you're not. Rick
Yeah.
Rude was on Nitro and Raw at the same time. Another
Remember
example
that?
of it, right? He's
Yeah.
on he's on both on the same show. He's on the same night. There's Rick Rude on Nitro, Rick Rude
Hmm.
on Raw. Like because handshake agreement, pal. Ha ha. Like that doesn't work. So Also, that's part of that was into episode number 3, the whole thing with the curtain call. Just I don't know why Triple H had to be the one to eat shit when Shawn was the champion. This whole thing where no, here's the thing. Here's another thing. A little nugget in the documentary. Vince greenlit. He
Hmm.
greenlit the idea that the curtain call could take place. A little
Hmm.
nugget says it on the record, like whatever Shawn wants. If you're happy with it, Shawn, I'll do it. And so he couldn't get pissed at it because he said it was okay. You
Yeah.
recall this, right?
Yeah. So a couple of things happened that maybe Vince didn't expect to really happen. One, it was recorded, which even back then in the mid '90s was wild and was able to kind of leak itself around. The second thing, and I don't know how Vince was not able to see this, the guys in the back were pissed that they did this curtain call. Because you have now totally destroyed kayfabe, which is what the industry had been built on, all of these decades, and now with that just one move, and even though Triple H was right, hey, that was the biggest pop of the night, was when we all hugged, but the guys in the back was like, what the hell are they doing? Like they just destroyed the industry with you destroyed kayfabe. Somebody's got to take the fall for this, and it wasn't going to be Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, and which I mean, I don't understand why.
Yeah,
some of
I
your
don't
some of your
either.
yeah, why Triple H? Now, of course, he came out whole on the other side.
Yeah.
uh I like to see Triple H's documentaries. Like, yeah, so when I ate shit all those years, I was planning to marry the daughter, yeah, get 3 kids, and then take over the company. Yeah, hopefully we'll get that as a documentary one day.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Kale X Rose says, when Vince Senior sold the business, I heard Monsoon got a piece of every New York house show till he died. That is correct. That is
Yes, that is
correct.
correct.
Yes, until he died. That's absolutely correct. Because Gorilla was a really good businessman,
Hmm.
very good business. He understood because he learned from Vince Senior. I mean,
Yeah.
that is for sure. Let's see, CJ. What else do we have here? Tricky 211 says Hulk Hogan became the Hulk Hogan we know today because of Andre.
Um, I mean, Hogan was kind of established, by the time they got to WrestleMania 3, but
Yeah,
I'll kind of agree that match, that WrestleMania, kind of like drove him into like superstardom, which is now where he was literally a household name at that point. Um, but to say that Andre did kind of make him in that sense in terms of being like a global household name, but Hogan was kind of already established by the time they got to that match because Hogan had already had the belt for what, almost 2 years at that point.
yes. Now the ultimate match, sure. I mean, after taking on the Bundys and the Orndorffs and you know the Bob Ortons and all the other people, the Moroccos, he made money with a lot of guys. People
Yeah.
love being on that Hogan tour. Heels
Oh, for
love to
sure.
be because they said it was a night off. Like it's like
Hmm.
15 minutes, and like you could beat Hogan's ass for 11 or 12 minutes, and
Yeah.
then he has to come back to fire to 1, 2, 3, and then the
Yeah.
night's
Hulk
over.
up.
Like,
Yeah.
and
He
you're at
hulks
the
up.
top. You're at the top of the card, and you
Hmm.
get the money because you're on the A
Yeah.
show. So yeah, people love that. Jimmy Thompson says, "Why did they change Iron Sheik into a completely different character?" He's talking about the '91 thing, right? Well, this is during a
Hmm.
time where Vince had changed a lot of names, not just Iron Sheik, because he was General.
What was he,
I forgot his.
General?
No,
He
General
was.
Adnan was part of that too. Adnan L. Casey was in
Yeah.
the AWA. He was
Yeah.
part of that group as well with Slaughter. Um,
Yeah. I
but
can't
whatever,
remember
yeah,
what.
it was part of what Vince wanted to do. He changed a lot of
Yeah.
names. Like a lot of people come in that was in the territory, came back to the territory, and he would change their name when you knew that the Widowmaker was Barry Windham.
Yeah.
Uh, like so yeah. So it's a great question. He did that a lot. He just changed a lot of names
Hmm.
uh in 90 91 during that time, in which we knew who the people were originally.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see. What hurt Vince is when the company went public.
That's
No,
a fair point.
yeah, I think so to an extent, yeah. Because now people are looking at you closely and your
Hmm.
business. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the business now. I mean, TKO is like, we can't have this. You can't be part of
Hmm.
this. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that was a good point. I think
Colonel Colonel Mustafa. Thank you, Jimmy. He was
that's
Colonel
that.
Mustafa. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, I
uh,
think had Vince kept control of it all, I don't necessarily know or believe that he would have ever have left. But once he took it public, and once you got other shareholders involved, it completely changed the game. And like you said, people are going to start asking questions. When these type of cases come up.
Okay, well, now John Nelson, here's what I say, John, watch the documentary and then come back to this podcast. And it's a nice companion piece because we review a lot of the highlights from the first 3 episodes of it. So if you're tuning in, yeah, no spoilers, absolutely. Come back
Yeah.
to it. Turn us off. And boy, I'm in the business telling someone to turn us off. Turn us off and then come back to us because I think that part one and part two of this will be a great companion piece. Any final thoughts? Because I know we still got a lot to go on this documentary, but I think that we hit some of the high and low lights of the Mr. McMahon documentary so far.
Yeah, like Tony Atlas, like you said, the MVP. I enjoyed pretty much everything he had to say on documentary so far. Um, I'm really going to be interested in finishing the series to see how they ended, because as we said at the top of this podcast, they're letting you know we're going to talk about the current events that's going on with Vince right now, and it'll also be interesting to see when they talk about these current events. Is anybody going to say anything? Because we know at the start of this that Vince declined to do a final interview once the allegations came out.
I'm looking forward to seeing if someone's going to talk about that on the record as well. I don't think it's going to be anybody currently in WWE. I'd say that, like Triple
Yeah.
H or Cody, because I know that they were interviewed. They had some spots in this as well. Probably
Hmm.
not. I guess my takeaway is that for those that do not know Vince McMahon, there were two different Vinces, and it was the creative genius, and it's the guy that either turned a blind eye to stuff or involved himself in it because he thought he was bigger than the world.
Hmm.
And I don't know, CJ. It just I go back to pop culture now and these stories, these allegations coming out, whether it's Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein and all these people, because it's all relatable in that, man, you think you're so big that you could just rape, um, and you could just drop pills into women's drinks and do what you want because you think that you're powerful. And I guess to their standpoint, they think they are powerful, but you think you're powerful and get away with it. It's going to come back to you. And like we were talking about with Sean Combs, it's the same thing. It's going to come back. People will see what's happening and you will get your day in court.
Yeah. I mean, Vince McMahon is just another person in this long line of list of powerful people that have used their power for their own personal uh, preferences. They've lied, they've manipulated, they've abused people, both physically, mentally, emotionally,
Mm.
and they felt that they've been able to get away with it because of the power and influence that they have had. Like I said, I think what's happening now in society, and really has been happening within the last decade plus 2 decades, is people are now having the courage to, speak up, about the trauma that they have suffered at the hands of these powerful people. And like I said, they're everyone's day is coming. No one is going to be immune to think that they could be able to get away with the things that they've done in life. We're seeing it with Sean Combs. We've seen it with the former president of the United States. We've
Yep.
seen it with Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, just uh, all types of powerful people, in this world. Your day is coming.
We ask you to go to the CTJ report. The CTJreport.net is where you can find Charles Taylor, our co-host here on this podcast. Support him because he'll be writing about a blog about this, and talking about the entire documentary. And of course, you could find me on Good Karma Wrestling again every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, on YouTube, and also Sunday mornings on Busted Open. That's on SiriusXM channel 156. And on the SiriusXM app, I'm on every Sunday with Justin LaBar. So hoping you get a chance to check out more of our wrestling content. For those of you watching, this is just part one because we got a lot more to go with this documentary. Look for part two, and how you look for part two, come back here. Like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. Wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this. That way you never miss an episode of this special edition of Good Karma Wrestling. Bret Hart is the man. If you didn't know that, watch the documentary. And we'll talk to you next time as we talk about Vince McMahon. He doesn't regret any of the things that he's done. He said that on the documentary, and we're talking about it right here on this special edition of Good Karma Wrestling.
Mm.